today we're going to go on just to the last part of the talk, obviously the financial planning side. And I thought I'd talk to you today about 7 lessons that certainly we can learn from our successful investors, and these lessons will actually help you to be successful. The first lesson is to understand that inflation is what I call public enemy number 1. And we have to realize this. Now, this graph over here gives you a lovely explanation of what inflation has done over nearly 50 years. Okay, so you can see very clearly there in the 1980s, I was still at school at that stage, and inflation went really, really high. I don't remember it being that high because I was probably too young, but for those of you who may have been around, it must have been a dreadful time when things were just getting so expensive, month in, month out. But if we look more recently, over about the past 10 years or so, inflation's been at the region of around about 5.3%, I think it is, over the last 10 years. So that gives you that indication of just how it has moved over the past about 50 years. If we look at what I call some good old South African favorites, okay, we can see the difference in price. And I'm just going to highlight the top one there. Looking at a Spur burger, can you imagine paying 30 cents for it? Right. So a Spur burger in 1970 cost about 30 cents. And we're looking now around about 75 Rand or so for a Spur burger. I mean, what a massive difference. And you can see that how the other things have also gone up. But let's look forwards rather, okay? We can see if you were to be buying a car, just an ordinary sedan, sort of 1,600, I looked at last year's prices, would have cost you around about 272,000 for the average sedan, buying it brand new. But if we go back to 1990, so if we look, say, over the last almost 30 years, we would see car inflation has actually been at about 5.8%. And that means if you try and buy a car in 10 years' time, same car, it's nearly R500,000 to buy that car. Maybe you've got grandkids and they're going to need a car in 25 years' time. Wow, the same car, about 1.1 million Rand to buy that car. Just quite incredible to think that. If we look at private education, kids going to a private school plus staying in the boarding house as well, at the moment it's costing about, on average, around about 215,000. In 10 years' time, per year, you're looking at over R500,000 Rand to fund that child. That is huge. Let's not go on to nearly 2 million Rand in 25 years' time. And that is per year. And you can get an idea of some medical expenses as well. So that's just showing you vehicle inflation, around about 5.8%. We look at private schooling, inflation about 9.2%, and medical inflation at about 10%. So that is a very good example why when the government says to us inflation's at 5.3%, and I go, my inflation's not at 5.3%, it's because I have other expenses such as these sorts of expenses, and the same would be for you. And that's why we've seen that inflation is just, in fact, that much higher. The next point, the next lesson to learn is that time is your friend. When it comes to investing, time is your friend. The best way to manage and ensure that you are not losing money is to be invested in equities. Now, I was told very, very clearly, don't use any jargon today. So I'm going to ask you, what are equities?
Shares.
Aha, you see, that's not jargon. People do know what equities are. Okay, so the point is to make sure that you are invested in shares, not just putting your money in a bank account. Very, very important. Consider the 2008 market correction. Now, I love that word, market correction. For the rest of us, we call it the market crash, don't we? All right? I'm sure most of you remember the market plummeted down in 2008. But if you had left your money there, dealt with the crash, just left it there, for each year thereafter, for the next 5 years, you would have seen the market grew, and I'm talking the South African market, grew by about 14% per year, every year. Just because you were able to then sit it out and leave your money. But if you'd taken your money out then and put it in your bank account, you would not have been able to achieve that growth. This is quite a nice graph in that what it does is it shows you the probability of losing money in shares, in equities, especially in the short term. So if you gave us money today and said, can we invest into shares for one day? look at that. The probability is that you could lose 45% of your money because you're only leaving it for one day. If you said, well, okay, I'm going to leave it for a week, well, it's still pretty high, 43%. But let's look over the long term. If you left it there for 5 or 10 years, you lose the probability of losing it, okay? Then at that stage, there's not really any chance of losing money because it's been invested in shares. So I thought that graph was quite a nice one to show you. So we need to, for lesson 3, we need to invest in equities. I think you're getting it, you're understanding, we've got to invest in equities if you are investing over the long term, so as to be able to get some nice growth. And it's a very well-known fact. If we look at South Africans, probably around about 6% of South Africans are actually going to be able to retire financially stable, which is a very, very low percentage. And once again, it's important to realize that you need to be able to invest in equities because those are your retirement investments are generally your long-term investments. And if you invest in equities, you should achieve the necessary growth that you need to get. Lesson 4, cash is trash. Okay, why do we say that? Well, if you put your money into a bank account and it's sitting there in a fixed deposit, you get wonderful security, don't you? You think, oh, at least my money's safe. But then you pay a fee for that security. And if it's a long-term investment, you should not be doing that. Totally different matter, ladies, if it's a short-term investment. If you only put in the money away for a couple of months, by all means, then we put it into cash. But we're talking long-term investments here. If we go back 94 years, these were the statistics I looked at, you would be able to see that money which has been held in cash, in other words in a bank account, would have grown at about 1% higher than the inflation rate. That's not going to do it for you. Not at all going to do it. It's not going to achieve the necessary growth that you need to get when it comes to investing, especially for the long term. So the lesson we learn here is that it's better to buy bank shares than to actually put your money in a bank account. This I thought was quite good, just to be able to point it out to you. How quickly do you actually double your money? Well, if we go back to looking at the examples we've been able to see, we can see here that if you put your money into SA equities, it should double, roundabout, this is averaging out, okay? Roundabout over a 10-year period, your money should actually double. If you put it into South African bonds, which of course are the guarantees that we use, it's going to take you about 42 years to actually double your money. But look at that in cash. 87 years to double your money because you've left it in cash. Can you see why you must not be leaving money in the long term in like a fixed deposit? You need to get better growth than that. Compound interest is lesson number 5. I love this picture. Just look at the tongue hanging out there. Albert Einstein, what did he say? Compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. He who understands it, earns it. He who doesn't, pays it. How true is that? If we have a look at this graph gives you a little bit of an idea of what compound interest is. Obviously, we get compound interest and we get simple interest. Compound interest is when you're getting interest upon interest. So if you invested 10 Rand and you get 9% growth, the next year you're going to get interest on that 10 Rand and the 90 cents that you've already received. So it's interest upon interest. That's what compound interest is. Compound interest is what allows a very average saver to become a wealthy individual. So what's the secret when it comes to compound interest? The secret really is not about how much you're saving. Not at all. It's about when you start to save, how early you start to save. The lesson we're learning here is start as soon as you can and leave it for as long as you can. And I'm specifically thinking about retirement planning here. For those of you who were here last year, I showed this graph, and you might remember it. I explained about 2 women, Sensible Sue on the one hand, Patricia the party animal. Sensible Sue and Patricia saw a financial planner at the age of 25. Okay? I like you laughing there, Sue. There we are, exactly. So they saw a financial planner at the age of 25 who said you need to start saving now for your retirement. And what did Sue do? Of course, I'm going to start saving now. And So she went on and she started with 1,500 Rand a month, and she saved from the age of 25 right until she retired at 65. And she saved 1,500 Rand a month. The total she had invested by the time she got to retirement was about 2.8 million Rand. Okay? But the value of her investments at retirement was about 15.8 million Rand. And they would be able to provide her with an income of around about 12 or so thousand Rand, 12,500 Rand. Okay. On the other hand, Patricia said, I'm having a good time. I'm 25, please, let's get real. I'm having a good time, I'm partying, we're buying a house, we're gonna have kids, we've got lots of things to spend our money on, but I promise I will get to my retirement savings, and I can assure you when I get to age 40, I'm gonna start and I'm gonna put loads of money in there. And so she did that. She went on and started with 5,000 Rand a month, not only 1.5. She said, no, I'll do 5,000 Rand a month. But you can see here, she only started at the age of 40. So by the time she got to age 65, she had invested quite a lot more than Sue had invested. She had actually invested 3.3 million. But her value at retirement was only 6 million Rand, which gave her then an income of 4,600 Rand. All the difference is the fact that Sue started so early. So the point is, the earlier you start to save, the more you will have when you actually retire. There's a high price of missing out on the good days. Okay, so the reality here is the fact that a lot of investors, they look at what's happening in the market, they think, oh, what's happening to South Africa? What is Cyril up to? Why are things crashing here? And every now and again, they whip their money out and say, I'll just put it in the bank for a while, just, it's safe, let me leave it there now, don't worry, I'll come back and put it in again. This is a huge problem, because if you look at the way the stock markets perform, and the JSE is a perfect example of that, almost the 10 best days the JSE has ever had at least, has been directly after turbulence in the country, okay? And we'll come back on again now. And so it's after bad news that what has happened is the JSE has actually done well. So if you had taken your money out, you would have lost out on that, those really, really good days, those 10 in particular good days. So it's important to say it's time in the market that counts, not trying to time the markets. Okay, here's an example. If you had 100 Rand to invest, and we're looking over a period of about 20 years or so, June 1997, this is the example. It shows here that if you invested that 100 Rand in June 97 and you never touched it again, just left it, basically by the end of December, it would have been worth 2,320 Rand. But if you'd got jittery and think, what's going on in South Africa? What was Zuma up to over this time, or whatever the case was? And you'd said, well, I'm going to quickly nip it out, put it in my bank account, or even maybe I need the money for whatever reason, quickly nip it out, and you lost the top 10 days over that period, your money would have only then been worth 1,068 Rand. And you can see all the others. If you miss the best 20, if you miss the best 30, if you miss the best 40 days, let's look at that. If you miss the best 60 days, just 60 days, 2 months, in that 20-year period, your 100 Rand would only be worth 171 Rand. The point is, invest the money, forget about it, leave us to manage it, and know that you need to be invested for the long term. You cannot keep taking out in times of when you think the market's not going to do well, or when South Africa's got problems. Okay. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. We all know the saying, we know exactly what it means. The reality is, if we have a look, equities, if we go back to 1929, so it's a really long term, we're looking at 90 years or so, equities has been the best performing asset class. And that's why I keep saying, you've got to be invested in equities. You've got to have those shares in your portfolio. But on the other hand, let's just, go back one, let's just confuse us and see, oh, hold on, but cash performed really well over 11 of those years. And property performed the best over 9 of those years. Now I'm really confused. Where should I actually be invested? maybe I should have some money in cash. What is the situation? Well, that's exactly the question. Where should you be investing? But I can assure you that when you are invested with core wealth, we will ensure you're well diversified. I'm not going to spend long on here, but what I do want to point out to you is that if you have a look in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, look at that. Property did the best over those periods. But let's look more recently, 2017, 2018, 2019, look where property was sitting there. The worst. Let's look over here again. Look how foreign equity was really terrible, 2008, 2009, 2010. But look at it up here, 2016, 2017, 2019, foreign equity was the best. Oh my word, where do we go? Do you understand how sometimes the one is good, the other is bad? And the point is that what we need to be doing is diversifying. Diversifying is like our second name. We diversify your investments. How do we diversify your investments? So when you are invested, for all of those of you who are already clients of ours, I can assure you that every investment that you have with us is extremely well diversified. And there are three ways in particular that we do diversify that money. Firstly, we look at the asset classes. We make sure you've got some in equities, you've got some in cash, you've got some in bonds, and you've got some in property. And I may add, on that property side, when we say property, we diversify it even further. Some of it's in commercial property, like the big office blocks in town, Claremont, Tiger Valley, those sorts of things. We diversify it across other types of properties, such as retail property, a little bit in shopping centres like Canal Walk, Cavendish Square, Sandton City, you name it. And then also industrial property. So in the big industrial factories and that sort of thing, up in Modderfontein, Kraaifontein, Epping, we see them in those sorts of places. So your money is extremely well diversified across different asset classes. But also, because we are totally independent, remember we are independent financial planners, we can use whichever company we like. And so therefore we diversify across different asset managers. And whoopsie, I've actually just given you some examples there of some of the asset managers that we use, some of the ones you really know well, Investec, Alan Gray, Coronation, Fouet, PSG, I'm sure you recognize all those names. So we use all those different fund managers to be able to choose, to be able to get them to choose where they believe is the best. Because remember, some of them are going to think retail's good, some of them are going to think gold's good, some of them are going to think financials are good. So we put it all together and your money becomes very well diversified. And lastly, it gets diversified geographically. So some of your money is invested in South Africa, some of your money is invested offshore, some of it's in emerging markets, some of it's in developed markets. Now, a lot of people say to us when we meet with them, they say, but shouldn't I be investing everything offshore? Isn't South Africa a bit of a mess? What's happening here? But very good question. And as I said, your investments are already well diversified. So you'll see that with all our portfolios, depending on the portfolio that you are invested in, will differ from one portfolio to another as to how much is invested offshore. But generally, if we look at our portfolios, they are between about 19 and 33% directly invested offshore. So you have got international investments already. Now, if you said to us, well, I wanted more, firstly, it's very important to remember that in those exact portfolios that we are using for you, a lot of those companies are South African companies, but they are deriving their income offshore. So in fact, it is more than the 19 to 33% that is actually being exposed to offshore. But I will remind you that because we are totally independent, we are able to look for other types of investments totally offshore. So if you came to us and you said, I insist that all my money is offshore, we can actually do that for you. We will not necessarily advise that that's the best thing for you to be doing. But the point is that we can do what you need, what you believe is most appropriate. For example, I've got clients which are offshore. I've got clients living all over the world. And will invest a lot of their money only offshore and only a small portion in South Africa. So it's really what is most suitable for you, and we will look at that. So to answer what I'm sure is on a lot of the tips of your tongues, with a lot of people are saying, shouldn't I be investing offshore? Yes, we certainly can be investing offshore for you, and most likely we are already. So just to wrap up, what do we at Core Wealth do? What are we here to do for you? What are we doing? Those of you who are clients already, what are we doing? We're doing three things. We protect your wealth, we organize your wealth, and we're here to grow your wealth. So when I talk about protecting, what am I talking about? We are protecting you from making poor decisions with your money. That's why we chat. That's why we talk about budgeting. How can we help you with your budgeting? We are here to protect you from that. When it gets confusing to know what should I be doing with my money, we are here to protect you with that. We are also here to protect your wealth from any unnecessary costs. Okay? We work very, very hard on negotiating fees with the various service providers to be able to give you the best costing structure. We also ensure that you're not going to be paying any unnecessary taxes, or your estates in the event of your death, that there's no unnecessary taxes. And lastly, on the protecting side, we are here to protect you and your families in the event of something like an accident, to ensure you've got the best medical scheme for you, and to ensure you have the most appropriate insurance cover in the event, for example, that you can't work or something happens to you. And don't forget, we're here to look after your short-term insurance needs as well. So that's protecting your home in the event of something that goes wrong, or protecting your car, as an example, if something goes wrong. So that's how we protect your money. When we talk about organizing your money, quite often I know people come to me and they sit down in front of me and they say, I've got all these different investments, I've got these different policies, I don't know what's going on. Can you help me with my money? And that's exactly what we do. We organize your money. Quite often, that means we need to consolidate some of your investments, but it makes it so much easier for you to manage and for you to understand exactly what your wealth is and where your money is being held. So that's the consolidation of investments that we quite often do, but we're also there to reduce your tax bill, to ensure that you're paying less tax than what you perhaps are paying at the moment, and also to ensure that you're paying on the most appropriate fee structure for your investments. And lastly, we balance your investments. So when we're actually organizing the investments, we are ensuring that you are invested in the correct asset classes, like I spoke about earlier, for your risk profile, firstly for your risk profile, and secondly for the length of time that you're going to be investing. So that's us organizing your money. And lastly, we're here to grow your money. We're here to grow it in the most appropriate way based on your risk profile, how much risk you are able to take without it being you getting yourself nervous or anything like that, and based on the length of time that you're going to be investing for. And also to ensure that you are investing at the fairest cost. And that's our job, to negotiate that for you. So I hope that's been a good lesson, if we can call it a Saturday morning school, to learn the 7 lessons of what I think are the 7 lessons of investing. I hope it's been of interest to you.